Mr. Booker T. Washington and others. And he talked about protests. And as I said, if I lived in Boston, maybe I might protest. But I developed a philosophy a long time ago. I would never say anything about the southern white man in the North that I wouldn't say to his face in the South. And I saw no reason to spend a lot of time talking about what hadn't been done, what should be done. The best thing we could do is work with folks who are interested in developing what is done. That's why when we know what happened in 01, a few years ago when the president was assassinated, the governor, well, I call him the governor, I didn't know him since he was the governor of New York, called me and said, "Look, I need to talk to you." And the idea is that he was a Northerner, he didn't know Southerners. I knew Southerners. I knew that if the Republican Party was going to have any future, it would be Negroes in the South. That's the Republican world. The whites were Democrats. But at the same time, I knew that the Republican Party was trying to develop what they call lily whites. But I also knew that there were white men who were Democrats, we call them gold Democrats, who were willing to work with the Republicans. And so I said, let's come in and work positively to develop a relationship politically between blacks, whites, between Republicans and gold Democrats to develop the Southland, to develop the nation as a whole. That's my way of working.
Thank you. Thank you. The next, Mr. Washington. I believe you were in Atlanta, Georgia in 1895.
Yes, sir.
Could you please tell all of us more about the important speech you made in Atlanta in 1895?
Well, that speech was made before the international group of industrialists. And Atlanta had decided it was going to be the mecca of the New South. Because after the war, the South was pretty much devastated. And the old plantation economy had pretty much gone. The new lands in the Midwest had opened up, and Florida had opened up. And the southern plantations were devastated, and a new rising industrial class was developing not only in the Northeast, but also in the South. And Atlanta said we were going to be the center of that. So they invited me in to give my idea of how black workers and white workers could work cooperatively to develop the industrial capacity of the South. That's essentially what it was about and what I spoke about, how we could do that. I said 1/3 of the population of the South is Negro. That third is either going to bring the South down, or you're going to harness the power of that third and it's going to bring the South up. And just depends on how we want to develop it educationally. And I felt industrial education was a way of developing that 1/3 so that they would be an asset to the South rather than be an arbitrary tross to the South. Education was the way. That's essentially what my message was.
Thank you. Tilly, I think you're next.
Mr. Washington, it's been about 30 years since you started urging blacks to be useful, hardworking, and patient individuals. But since then, Jim Crow laws, lynching, and racism, all in all, has gotten worse. Do you think it's time to stop accommodating racism and start to take action against these horrible acts?
Oh, I've never been an accommodator. When I talk to Negroes, I said you should speak your mind in every manly way. I don't think that you should cow down. That's one of the reasons I encourage every Negro to pay his poll tax, to vote. Those where we can. We pay our poll tax. All my staff and teachers pay their poll tax to vote. But the reality of it is, in terms of our people, we just can't do anything directly to determine what white people are going to do. That's why I work with other white people to try to help them influence the white people. All I can do is to try to influence the black people, and again, to influence the white people indirectly by proving the value that the blacks would develop for the society as a whole, with the understanding that there is something in the American character that recognizes merit. And if gradually more and more white people start to recognize the merit in the black industrial workers, then they will convey to their white brothers the value of working positively to develop democracy in America. That's the idea I work for.
And you're sticking to it.
Indeed.
This gentleman here.
Mr. Washington, you talk a lot about boundaries and boundaries of entrepreneurism. I was wondering, and how it affects individuals and their class and their society and their country. I was wondering if you might be able to talk about the boundary between entrepreneurism and organized labor, like a labor union.
Well, I just feel that if you got people working for a common cause, and if workers demonstrate that they have an interest and they have a love and dedication, not just for working for a place to have a job, but they appreciate the dignity and the love of labor, they're going to develop this corporation that they're going to work for. Then the owners and the managers of that corporation can see how those workers are working to develop themselves. And it just stands to me that the two sides are going to come together because they're working for the same thing. Now, again, I'm a realist, so I know in the North that you have labor unions and you have all types of stripes, and well, Northerners have to do what Northerners have to do. But I just feel as though since we're going to industrialize the South and we have a chance to try a new model, and that's why I teach my students that what you are working for is not just a job, but to be a productive member and to love labor, then you're going to demonstrate that, and they're going to see it's in their best interest to work positively with you because you are creating wealth for them.
Move over to here.
Good evening, Mr. Washington. I am a proud graduate and happy to see you here. I would like for you to enlighten us on your relationship with Dr. George Washington Carver and how this relationship manifested such that Tuskegee has grown to such prominence in the United States and even throughout the world. Thank you, sir.
No man I respect more than Dr. Carver. Of course, Dr. Carver got a mind of his own, and I know how to approach him. Sometimes Mr. Logan, the bookkeeper, has problems because Dr. Carver don't always cash his checks. But Dr. Carver apparently feels as though he don't need the money. But when the government set up a series of agricultural experimental stations around the country, they said there would be 2 experimental stations set up in, 3 would be set up in Alabama. Auburn and University of Alabama, and we petitioned to have one set up in Tuskegee. And Dr. Carver then had a chance to demonstrate his genius of not only growing crops, but working scientifically and to train others. He then came up with the idea of farmers' conferences, and we would bring farmers. First it was from Macon County, now all over the South. They come in, 2,000 or 3,000 come, and they talk to each other as farmers and talk to each other about how you develop. He developed a wagon that went out through the area. Mr. Morris K. Jessup up there in New York funded this. We call this the Jessup wagon. And it became, in some ways, a model for what eventually developed into the agriculture extension program going out to develop folks. In fact, one man at this last conference came in and he talked about, he laid his demonstration. He said, you know, I've been coming to these conferences now for several years. When I first came here, I would get 7 bowls of cotton to a stalk. He said, then in time, I got 9 bowls. He said, and then I got 12 bowls. He said, the last crop, he said, I got 14 bowls for stalk. And then he turned around and walked off. He said, someone said, what's your name? he stopped. He said, well, he said, when I first moved in that community, he said, well, I just said, this is colored folks, right? He said, the white folks called me old nigger Sam. He said, but after a while, he said, I acquired 300 acres of land. He said, I built a 9-room brick house. He said, my a barn is whitewashed. He said, I got a nice picket fence around. He said, I got a bank account. And he said, I'm contributing to the community and the labor. He said, now they call me Mr. James Jones.
Thank you. I'm afraid we have time for only one more question. This young gentleman here.
Was Tuxedo one of the major schools back then?
Oh, we'd like to think that Tuskegee is one of the major schools today. And again, I have to say, built on the model of the Hampton Institute, which is where I graduated from. And yes, we consider ourselves one of the major schools in the country, if not the world.
Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to Charles Everett Pace. Charles has been here 3 times before representing Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Langston Hughes. And I've also seen his presentation of Malcolm X. Whoa! So this is quite a change to hear you representing Booker T. Washington.
It was a strange experience for 5 years that I was doing Booker T on the Great Plains. To know that I was standing before an audience in Oklahoma, Nebraska, and Kansas, and knew that I was probably the most conservative male in the audience.
Okay, questions? Yes.
Were there women students or professors at Tuskegee?
Oh, indeed there were, from day one. The lady